Hey everyone, welcome to Resilience Unravelled. This podcast is a result of my fascination with subjects like resilience, accountability, burnout, life fulfillment and other life and work-based performance issues, as well as many of the other obsessions I bump into in my life. I spend my time working with highly successful teams, people and organisations, and this podcast introduces their remarkable stories and expertise, as well as my own synthesis of the key issues, strategies, tips, tools and resources to thrive in life. If you find this podcast useful, why not go over to our site qedod.com. If you'd like some resources on how to manage and beat burnout, head to qedod.com/burnout2019 for some goodies. Stay tuned to the end to find out details of how to order a free ebook. Enjoy the podcast. So today I'm talking to Darlene Lancer, and Darlene has a very impressive website we're going to talk about later, and a huge roster of books that are really interesting in terms of therapy and all sorts of different pieces. And she seems to specialize in something that's called codependency. She describes it as being sneaky and powerful, and we're going to talk a lot about codependency today and its links to resilience. And I'm very much hoping that Darlene will also talk a little bit about perfectionism, and she has a book about that as well. So good afternoon, Darlene.
Well, good afternoon to you, and it's morning for me, so I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you and share my research and experience with your audience.
No problem. And you say it's morning for you, and I can detect from your accent that you're from the States. So tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do, Darlene.
Well, sure. Thank you. I'm in California, and I live near the sea in Santa Monica, which is a suburb, or it's a small city adjacent to Los Angeles, right on the coast. And we get a lot of Brits coming over here in the winter for tourists. And it's sunny, and they call it sunny Southern California. And I see clients, couples and individuals, and I write books, and I'm post on social media all the time. So that's basically what I do.
What a fantastic life.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice, and this discussion about codependency and how you got into this sort of line of work.
Well, I used to be an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood, which is where I live in Los Angeles. And after doing that for almost 20 years, I finally got the courage to leave because I wasn't happy doing it.
Sure.
And it wasn't really my authentic calling, which touches on the subject of codependency. And then I went back to school and got a master's in psychology and pursued what I really wanted to do, was to work with people. And I realized as a kid, I actually wanted to be a shrink. I was reading Freud's interpretation of dreams when I was just 12 years old and thought, wow, now that would be amazing to be able to understand the meaning of dreams.
Yes.
I don't think I agreed with Freud, even at 12.
No.
But
it was very much of its time, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. And then I moved on to Jung when I was a teenager, and Carl Jung, and I like that him even more. And then I got sidetracked and wanted to work in the diplomatic corps, and I thought I'd go to law school, and but the Vietnam War really turned me off to that.
Sure.
So I ended up working in entertainment law, and then eventually I was successful at it, but I just wasn't happy.
Yes.
And I also wasn't happy in my marriage.
Right.
And I started counseling, and I was seeing patients, and I was blogging and about different things. And I actually wrote a blog about codependency and that was part of my own journey.
Right.
I was married to an alcoholic, and so I wrote a blog about it, and then the publisher, John Wiley and Company, that publishes codependency, the Dummies series,
Yes.
asked me to write the book Codependency for Dummies
Okay.
because they had found my blog, and I had to compete with some other writers and therapists, but once they asked me and I started thinking about the topic in a deep way, I realized this was meant for me to write about, because
Yes.
even though I didn't officially specialize in it, that's really what I was doing with my clients, was helping them. Another way of looking at it is to individuate,
Yes.
to become their separate whole person.
Yes.
And that was also my journey. So I learned more in researching and working with my clients, and also from my personal experience.
So
And
what?
then I
So
was just overjoyed to be
yeah.
doing therapy and helping people and writing, which is the other thing I wanted to do as a kid, was be a writer.
Yes. So it's a word that's used frequently, but and I think sometimes overused and used and abused. And maybe you can just break down codependency, what it is, and where it
Sure.
comes from, and why it might be a problem.
Yeah. Well, there isn't one consensus or consensual definition. It's not in the diagnostic code that psychologists and psychiatrists use.
Yes.
So some people dismiss it because it's not like recognized by the American Medical Association, et cetera, like as a diagnostic mental disorder.
Yes.
But clinicians use it all the time, and we know what it is when we see it. And there's different definitions, and mine is really based on some focus on the relationship, and some focus on childhood, and I really focus on the individual. I think of it as a disorder of the self,
Right.
that a codependent is someone with a lost self. And instead of tuning into your needs, your thoughts, your feelings, your wants, codependents, by and large, their thinking and behavior revolve around something external,
Right.
be it a person, a substance, or a process.
I see.
So in my definition, I include addicts.
I see.
So I say addicts are codependent too. I actually had a dispute with one of my publishers because they couldn't figure it out, because traditionally addicts were on one side and codependents it started from co-alcoholism,
Right.
were considered a different category. And that was how codependency arose as a term from research on alcoholism and family members who they called were co-alcoholics at first. And then they saw that, wait a minute, their problems and their dysfunctional behavior continued after the alcoholic got sober, and in fact, when they looked deeper, predated the marriage, that they came from dysfunctional family system.
Right.
So in the early days, some of the definitions had to do with the family system that they grew up in. But I see it as more as an internal problem.
So is this really about a lack of self-esteem?
Well, it's deeper than that. Lack of self-esteem is a symptom.
Right.
The deeper, one of the through lines, and in my book, Conquering Shame and Codependency, 8 Steps to Freeing the True You, I say that shame and codependency co-emerge. I couldn't say that one causes the other, but they both co-emerge out of this unhealthy parenting. And it often is transgenerational, because your parents are going to be codependent and they're going to behave in a way that's going to generate that in you by not attuning to you, from emotional abandonment, not being present for you. Every child needs to feel that they're uniquely loved by each parent.
Yes.
Just one parent is not enough. And that means that that parent wants a relationship with them. And it's not the same as conditional love. Like, good boy, you got an A, or you were the star of the football game or something.
Yes.
It's for who you are based on your personality and your unique gifts or lack of them, that you're lovable just for being, just for who you are,
Yes.
with no accomplishments. And that's rare.
Interesting. And I noticed that in some of your writing, you talk about the fact that codependency comes from, or it's prevalent if you're raised in what you call a dysfunctional family.
Yes.
So, and then you go on to say that actually most families are dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a statement that's factual, or is that just helping? Is that just there to actually help us feel better, or is that actually because
Well,
there's a
I don't know
commentary?
if there's research. I don't know there's actually research on that, but
But it is
from
interesting.
observation.
Yeah, it is interesting that we don't seem to teach or train people in parenting, do we? We seem to spend a lot of time dealing with the symptoms of poor parenting without actually getting people to parent better.
Yeah, it would be great if in high school they had a parenting course.
Yes.
It's so important, and it's so undervalued.
Yes. I mean, I find in my work in resilience that again a large element comes from parenting, and it does seem to be something that we miss out on, isn't it? So if we have someone who has an issue around codependency, what symptoms might we be seeing?
Well, there's several core symptoms, and you touched on one is low self-esteem, and that's a factor of shame.
I see.
So there's but most people, at least in the West, probably Britain too, they're maybe not so conscious of shame. It's more commonly talked about in collectivist cultures. I see a lot of, because we have so many immigrants, I see a lot of people from Latin America, from the Middle East, from Asia, from Russia. Right. And shame is talked about in the family. You're ashamed to the family. People are publicly shamed. In South Korea, students that don't, do well on their exams even commit suicide out of shame. Yes. So it's used to socialize children, and the often in some countries the political system uses it to coerce behavior through shaming. But it's a basic human emotion, and it's worldwide. In the West, maybe because of the historical religious beliefs, that guilt is usually more talked about. People feel more guilty, and actually guilt is a healthier way because it means that you can change your behavior.
Yes.
You did something wrong, and now you can correct it, and it encourages people to reform themselves, and it can build self-esteem.
Yes.
Shame, on the other hand, makes people feel irredeemable. It's not what I did, it's I am the problem.
Yes.
So I am an outsider. There's something wrong with me. It's a feeling of wanting to withdraw, and that you're alienated from the mainstream, that people don't like me, that I'm not good enough. That's a basic core feeling that codependents have, that they're never good enough. So they have to work hard to please people, or to do extra work at the office, or give more in a relationship, or pursue someone who doesn't love them. Always trying to earn love and win love. And that comes from this deep, they won't be conscious that they have shame, but it propels that kind of, it's the core of so much of codependent behavior.
Right.
And shame leads to fear and guilt and low self-esteem.
Yes.
So people have irrational guilt. even when they feel guilty for other people's feelings or other people's behavior or things that they're not responsible for. And that comes from too much shame.
Yes.
Another core symptom is control. So often they're trying to control other people or control their emotions. And because they're going back to the definition that who they are is based on what how someone else thinks and behaves, it's all external. So that drives them to control other people. So you can think of people pleasing as a form of manipulation or control. Or some people are very direct and say you have to do this and you have to do that. You have to listen to me. So you have to control someone else, their thinking and their behavior. So you will feel okay.
And without being overly simplistic, is it possible to reduce the symptoms of shame, or even to eradicate the initializing shame that might exist?
Absolutely.
Good.
So what happens is with codependency, everybody has shame. It's just like anger or sadness is a human emotion. But I write about toxic shame. There's another clinical term called internalized shame.
Yeah.
And that's when we've experienced shame in our childhood from this dysfunctional parenting. And by the way, it doesn't have to be overtly shaming you're a bad boy or things like that, or girl. It could just be parents ignoring your needs.
Right.
Or why would you want that? Or that's silly, or don't feel sad, or shaming anger.
Yeah.
Sometimes for religious reasons. So there's all kinds of indirect ways. Sometimes there's just too many children, so a child gets ignored. There's indirect ways that parents create shame, or of course there's abuse.
Yes.
All kinds of emotional, physical, sexual abuse.
Yes.
And so it gets, what we say is internalized. We call it toxic shame, because then it becomes part of the person. It's not just a passing emotion. It becomes part of their personality. Some people, you can tell by their posture. They just walk around, they don't speak up, they don't reach out. They just are their whole personality is shame-based. Other people, it's more hidden. They could be very successful, but their ego is very fragile. They're very defensive. I also believe that narcissists are codependent too.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into that too much, but yes. So the goal then is to not eradicate shame, but to normalize it.
I see.
So I could give you a personal experience, I had a narcissistic mother, and maybe you know that narcissists project a lot.
Yeah.
So she would say that I'm selfish or self-centered. And so those words were triggers for a lot of shame for me in irrational ways as an adult. And I remember talking with a friend after I was very upset about a relationship that was ending. And I was feeling very sad and hopeless and dejected and rejected. And I was meeting with a friend, and she said to me, Darlene, this whole time you haven't asked me how I am. You've just been going on about yourself.
Yeah.
I would have been mortified in the past.
Oh, I see.
And I would have been so anxious. Oh, by the way, shame causes a lot of anxiety. It's called shame anxiety, and codependents have a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I would have just been speechless. I would have wanted to disappear or hang my head, not make eye contact. Those are symptoms of shame. And instead, I just said, oh, you're right. Yes, I was just very upset about, this boyfriend situation. And I started talking to her and asking about her. I was able to be present and shift. So, or make mistakes, on stage,
Yes.
and not be able to lose your train of thought. So to be present and continue. So those are ways where it shifts and becomes normalized. We all have situations where we might feel humiliated, embarrassed. It's worse if it's in public,
Yes.
but then we're able to shift. Maybe it bothers us for an hour, maybe for 5 minutes, maybe
Yes.
for a day, but it doesn't consume us
No.
like it would in the past, where people go on for months, maybe, and they can't get out of what I call a shame spiral.
And I can
They just
see,
fall into a well of shame.
and I can see there's almost a triage in therapy of being able to say certain types of shame would respond best to CBT, some with deep counselling and such like. And I think so actually seeing a counsellor or seeing a therapist is actually quite important to see which is the best course of treatment to deal with the underlying shame. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Good.
And some people, you're talking about resilience and goals, and some people feel ashamed, I write about this, of their desires. Like,
Yes.
I know someone wanted to be like a host, like you are, or even a television host, and that felt like, oh, that's too self-aggrandizing. I don't even want to tell anybody that's my secret wish.
Yes.
So it could keep people from really, pursuing what they want, and it makes people risk averse because they don't want to look foolish. There's a learning curve and everything. They don't want to make mistakes. So they just do what's familiar.
Yes.
So it makes it hard to get negative feedback. It makes it hard to take risks, to change, to try new things. Other symptoms are dysfunctional communication, dysfunctional boundaries, perfectionism in some people.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want me to, and being dependent on someone else.
Well, I think
rejection.
So you're going to ask me how much I wanted you to go into that subject. We could spend an hour talking about that. But I think the place to go actually is to have a look at your website, and I think the URL is www.whatiscodependency.com.
That's right.
And actually, it's interesting when you're on that website. There's a lot of books about codependency. There's a Conquering Shame and Codependency, which seems to be really a lot of about what we're talking about. But also the actual book Codependency for Dummies is available there as well, and a Daily Reflections book as well. So you're obviously a very prolific writer, and maybe the starting point for somebody to think about, if this discussion about shame is resonating with them, is to go and have a look at those books. Is that a sort of sensible starting point?
Oh yes. I want to point out that the core symptom, they call it the hallmark of addiction, and some people refer to codependency as an addiction, a disease, or you get addicted to other people. It underlies all addiction. So if you have another addiction, you might look underneath that to see if there's some codependency with that, whatever it is. But what I was going to say is a core symptom is denial.
Okay.
So just getting educated about codependency is the first step.
I see.
So people are in denial often that they're abused.
Yes.
I was being abused in a relationship, and I knew that, it didn't feel good, but I didn't know that there was a word for it, there's now is much more publicly talked about abuse.
Yes.
So it's more out in the open, but I didn't have a word for it. And when I started calling it out, it started lessening,
Yes.
So I was able to speak up and set boundaries. And that's one of the reasons I wrote a book, How to Speak Your Mind, Become Assertive and Set Limits. And then I did a webinar, How to Be Assertive, because that is so important in recovery, is to be able to have better boundaries, to be able to find your voice.
Yes.
Because when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you feel like you don't matter. You don't have a voice. Your needs, your wants, your feelings, your words are either shamed, or they're just ignored or discounted in some way. So to be able to speak up raises your self-esteem and helps you recover. And then I wrote a book on 10 steps to self-esteem, because we internalize those negative voices and we start criticizing ourselves. And that's the other huge obstacle. You mentioned CBT. That's an important tool and technique. And my books all have CBT exercises in them. So overcoming self-criticism is another, milestone or tool you can use to raise your self-esteem and overcome codependency.
Yes.
And by the way, the more you increase your ability to be assertive rather than passive or aggressive, those are the opposites, that builds self-esteem. And the more you build your self-esteem, the more assertive you are. There's a synergistic effect. Even in going on an interview, someone can size up your self-esteem just by your posture and the way you talk.
Yes, very true. And actually, if you're the partner of someone who is experiencing codependency, actually part of your job is to help them become assertive. And actually, sometimes that's the easiest thing of all, because one might be spotting these signs in your own partner, never mind for yourself.
Likely, I usually think that it takes two. Usually people are attracted to someone. It may be, it's tricky because codependency can be expressed, it comes out differently. So it could be someone who is a pursuer, then is with someone who seems someone who's a pursuer and seems needy and dependent, and they get in relationships with someone who seems very independent and needless, but underneath there's still codependency. The behavior looks different. Or someone who's a bully, as I mentioned before, or an abuser is also codependent. A master needs a slave.
Absolutely.
But the behavior looks different. It looks like the victim looks like, oh, they're the codependent one, but so is the bully. They won't want their slave, the victim, to become independent. They don't want them sharing what's going on. They don't want them to get therapy. They want to hold on to them.
Yes, that's right.
So there's still codependency underneath.
Yes, that resistance within and I see this even within the workplace environment, that resistance to change, where you have codependency is very, very difficult to conquer.
Right. Even they say that the most dangerous time when you're with an abuser is when you start to leave, because they will try to stop you. So that shows how dependent they are.
Yes.
But what you said about relationships and self-esteem, I want to touch on. It's very important that your self-esteem, and I have a blog on how self-esteem will make or break your relationships.
Nice.
And they have done research on this. There's a lot of research on self-esteem, by the way.
Yeah.
But your self-esteem can predict the longevity of your relationship, and low self-esteem is a predictor for a poor prognosis.
Yes.
On the flip side, if you're with someone who has high self-esteem, just like if you're with someone with a secure attachment, there's a lot about attachment theory now, it can elevate your self-esteem, because they won't try to put you down. They will encourage you. They will be your best supporter and fan to go out and take risks in the world and try something new. And so they're not threatened.
Fascinating.
And so it can raise your self-esteem if you're with someone with high self-esteem.
Aren't we in a marvelous sort of profession where we can actually help people and throw enlightenment on these sorts of issues for people?
Yes.
Yeah, Darlene.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the question.
No, it's okay. I was just reflecting on the fact that all of this information that's available for people to help themselves, help other people, to make sense of the world is just incredible. And your website has a ton of information on it. I would really suggest people go and have a look at it. And in fact, I've already signed up to the 14 Tips for Letting Go series. So,
thank you.
So I'm looking forward to receiving those, and there's videos, and I'd really encourage you to go and have a look. Darlene, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it. And I think really what you've demonstrated today is your depth of knowledge, and actually on a podcast, all we really do is scratch the surface of your knowledge. So please do go and have a look at that website, which is whatiscodependency.com. So thank you so much, Darlene, for spending time with us today.
Okay, well, I just also want to just tell everybody that on my website, there's links to my YouTube channel, my Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, where I post every day. So I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's been real fun. Thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you. So you take care. Thanks for listening today. You can go to our site qedod.com/podcasts and subscribe to hear other titles in our series. Or you can contact us at info@qedod.com to hear and find out more about tough love, leadership, accountability, resilience and burnout. You can go to our site qedod.com/burnout2019 to hear and get access to a load of resources to help you manage and fight burnout. And you can go to qedod.com/free ebook to hear more about the fundamentals of resilience. Until the next episode, keep on thriving.